The wooden chair felt ice-cold beneath me as I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, performing the role of the dutiful, submissive wife I'd perfected over 8 long years. Across from me, Elias lounged at his lawyer's polished table, his designer suit crisp and immaculate, his smile radiating pure confidence. He looked like a man who'd already claimed victory. Perhaps he genuinely believed he had. "You'll never see a single cent of my money again. Not for as long as you live," he hissed, his voice pitched just loud enough for his attorney to catch every word. That same condescending tone, the one he'd used when informing me I couldn't purchase groceries without his explicit permission, or when he'd explained why I no longer needed a credit card of my own. He sat there looking triumphant, like a hunter who'd just bagged the trophy of a lifetime. Behind him in the gallery sat Kendra, her perfectly manicured fingers resting delicately on her designer handbag. She leaned forward slightly, her crimson lips curving into a smile that made my stomach turn. "That's right, babe," she mouthed softly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She called him babe, the same endearment I'd used when I still believed our marriage meant something, when I thought the man I'd married actually existed. Beside Kendra sat Dorothea, Elias's mother, as if they were longtime confidants planning an exclusive society luncheon. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her icy blue eyes bored into me as though I were something disgusting she'd accidentally stepped in. She despised me from the moment Elias brought me home 8 years ago. I wasn't wealthy enough for her precious son. I lacked the proper breeding. I didn't possess sufficient refinement. I was unworthy of carrying the Caldwell name, or so she'd always insisted. "She doesn't deserve a single dime," Dorothea announced, her voice reverberating through the hushed courtroom. She smiled as she spoke, that same smile she'd given me every Christmas when she'd handed me a generic department store gift card while presenting Kendra with extravagant jewelry. Even before the affair began, Dorothea had been orchestrating my replacement. My attorney, Mr. Ross, sat beside me, nervously shuffling papers. He appeared anxious, as if he already knew we were about to lose everything. Elias's legal team consisted of 3 high-powered attorneys from the most prestigious firm on Fifth Avenue. Their briefcases bulged with documents proving I'd never held employment, possessed no professional qualifications, and deserved nothing more than a basic subsistence allowance. They'd painted me as a gold digger who'd ensnared their innocent client. Judge Wallace, a woman in her late 50s with a penetrating gaze and salt and pepper hair, had been listening to their arguments all morning. She had a reputation for being tough but impartial. She rarely smiled and seemed unimpressed by expensive suits or high-profile lawyers, yet even she appeared prepared to rule in Elias's favor. "Your Honor," Elias's lead counsel announced, rising with a thick binder clutched in his hands. "My client has been extraordinarily generous. Mrs. Caldwell possesses no employment history, no education beyond a high school diploma, and no assets of her own. She's enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle for 8 years without contributing anything to the household income. A modest monthly stipend would be more than fair." I wanted to laugh bitterly. No employment history? I'd managed Elias's entire social calendar, organized his business dinners, and handled all the household administration that kept his life running seamlessly. No education. I had a bachelor's degree in marketing that I'd never been allowed to use because Elias had convinced me work wasn't necessary. No assets. That was because every time I'd attempted to save money or open my own account, Elias had manufactured a reason why it was impossible. But I sat silently, playing the role everyone expected, the weak, helpless wife who didn't understand money, business, or how the real world operated. I'd been performing this part for so long that sometimes I almost believed it myself. Elias turned to look at me, his dark eyes brimming with satisfaction. He believed he'd completely crushed me. For the past 6 months since I discovered his infidelity, he'd been preparing for this exact moment. He'd transferred funds, concealed assets, and ensured everything appeared to belong solely to him. He'd assumed I was too foolish to notice, too frightened to fight back. Mr. Ross slowly stood, looking like a man walking toward his own execution. "Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to submit on behalf of my client. His voice trembled slightly as he reached into his briefcase and extracted a single white envelope. Mrs. Caldwell has prepared a letter for the court's consideration. Elias's lawyer looked bewildered. They hadn't been informed of any letter. Elias frowned, his confident smile wavering. Kendra shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfect posture beginning to crumble. Dorothea's cold eyes narrowed as she watched Mr. Ross approach the judge's bench. Judge Wallace accepted the envelope and carefully opened it. The courtroom fell so silent I could hear the rustle of paper as she unfolded the letter. Initially, her expression remained neutral. Then slowly, her eyebrows began to rise. She read for what felt like an eternity. Elias's lawyers began whispering frantically among themselves. Elias himself stared at me, trying to decipher what I could possibly have written that held any significance. He still looked self-assured, but now something else flickered in his eyes, something that might have been worry. Judge Wallace finished reading and looked up at everyone assembled before her. Then something extraordinary happened. She began to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine belly laugh that echoed off the courtroom walls. She laughed so hard she had to set the letter down and remove her glasses to wipe her eyes. "Oh, this is good," she said quietly, though her voice carried perfectly in the silent room. "This is very, very good." The confident smiles vanished from their faces as if someone had flipped a switch. Elias's face drained of color. Kendra's mouth fell open. Dorothea's icy composure cracked, and for the first time in 8 years, she looked genuinely terrified. I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Finally, after months of meticulous planning and preparation, it was time for them to learn the truth. 3 years ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Elias would arrive home from work carrying flowers, kiss me at the door, and tell me how fortunate he was to have me. We lived in his family's magnificent estate on the Upper East Side with its white columns and perfectly manicured lawns. I felt like a princess living in a fairy tale. "Serena, you don't need to worry about money," Elias told me one evening as we sat at the dining room table. He cut his filet mignon with precise movements, exactly the way his mother had taught him. "I earn enough for both of us. You should focus on making our home beautiful." I'd been working at a small marketing agency downtown, helping local businesses with their advertising campaigns. I loved my job, the creative challenges and the sense of accomplishment when a campaign succeeded. But Elias had been hinting for months that I should resign. "But I enjoy working," I said, twirling pasta on my fork. "And the extra income helps us save for our future." Elias set down his knife and looked at me with those dark eyes that used to make my heart flutter. "Honey, we don't need your little paycheck. It barely covers your gas and work clothes. Wouldn't you rather spend your time making our home perfect? Maybe start planning for children?" The way he said "little paycheck" made my cheeks burn. I earned decent money, enough to contribute to groceries and utilities. But when I looked around our expensive dining room with its crystal chandelier and imported furniture, I felt insignificant. Maybe he was right. Maybe my contribution didn't really matter. "I suppose I could take some time off," I said softly. Elias's smile was radiant. "That's my smart girl. You'll be so much happier at home." Within a month, I'd resigned from my job. Elias assumed control of all our finances, claiming it would be simpler if everything came from one account. He gave me a credit card for household expenses and told me to let him know if I needed anything else. At first, it felt wonderful to be cared for. I spent my days decorating our house, cooking elaborate meals, and organizing Elias's business dinners. But gradually, things began to change. The credit card had a low limit, and Elias questioned every purchase. When I bought new curtains for the living room, he asked why I hadn't consulted him first. When I spent $50 at the grocery store, he demanded to see every receipt. "Serena, we need to be more careful with money," he said one night, reviewing the card statement with a red pen. "This charge from the coffee shop. What was that for?" "I met my friend Chloe for coffee," I said, feeling like a scolded child. "It was only $8. $8 here, $12 there. It adds up. Maybe you should invite your friends here instead. It's more cost-effective." I stopped meeting friends for coffee. Then I stopped buying new clothes without permission. Then I stopped purchasing anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Elias praised me for being so responsible, so understanding of our budget, but I noticed he continued buying expensive suits and attending business lunches that cost more than my entire weekly allowance. Dorothea made everything worse. Elias's mother came for dinner every Sunday and always had criticism about how I managed the house. The garden flowers weren't arranged correctly. The pot roast wasn't seasoned properly. My dress was too casual for a Caldwell family meal. "Elias, darling," she said one Sunday, cutting her roast into tiny pieces. "I saw a charming girl at the country club yesterday, Kendra Sterling, the interior designer. She's from such a distinguished family, and her work is absolutely exquisite." Elias nodded politely, but I caught something in his expression, interest. "I've heard of her work. Very talented. You should hire her to redecorate the guest rooms," Dorothea continued, not looking at me. "They could use a professional touch." I'd spent weeks decorating those guest rooms, choosing colors and fabrics I thought were lovely. But sitting there listening to Dorothea, I felt everything I did was inadequate, amateur, not good enough for their family standards. "That's an excellent idea, Mother," Elias said. "Serena, what do you think?" What could I say? That I wanted to keep the rooms I'd worked so hard on? That hiring someone else felt like admitting I was a failure? "Of course," I said with a smile that felt like plastic. "Whatever you think is best." That's when the phone calls started. Elias would step outside to take calls, claiming they were work-related. He started working late more frequently, arriving home after I'd already eaten dinner alone. When I asked about his day, his answers grew shorter, less detailed. "How did the Corbett project meeting go?" I asked one night as he loosened his tie. "Fine," he said, not looking at me. "The usual client demands." But I'd seen his planner that morning when he'd left it on the kitchen counter. There was no Corbett meeting scheduled. There was an entry that read, KS, 10 a.m., with the name of a restaurant I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. Credit card statements Elias quickly tucked away. Phone calls that abruptly ended when I entered the room. A new cologne that smelled different from his usual scent. Shirts that returned from the dry cleaners with lipstick smudges that weren't my shade. One night, while putting away his clean laundry, I found a receipt in his pants pocket. It was from an expensive downtown restaurant, dated the previous Tuesday. The bill was for 2 people, including champagne and dessert. But Tuesday night, Elias had told me he was working late on paperwork at the office. My hands trembled as I held the receipt. The total exceeded my monthly allowance. Someone had ordered the lobster and the chocolate soufflé, dishes Elias always claimed were too expensive when we looked at menus together. I sat on our bed, staring at that slip of paper, and felt something shatter inside my chest. This wasn't about money or work stress or family pressure. This was about lies. This was about Elias living a completely different life when he wasn't with me. That night, when Elias came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, I didn't say anything. I smiled and asked about his day, and he told me about meetings I now knew hadn't happened. I nodded, served him dinner, and pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was already beginning to plan. The next morning, I waited for Elias to leave for work before getting dressed. Instead of my usual routine of cleaning and organizing, I put on dark jeans and a baseball cap. I felt like a spy in a movie, except this was my real life falling apart. I drove to Elias's office building on Fifth Avenue and parked across the street where I could watch the entrance. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. What was I doing? Following my own husband like some paranoid person. But I had to know the truth. At 11:30, Elias walked out of the building. He wasn't alone. A woman with long blonde hair and a red coat walked beside him. She was beautiful in a way that made my stomach hurt, tall, elegant, with perfect posture and expensive clothes. Everything I wasn't. They got into Elias's car together, laughing about something. The woman placed her hand on his arm as they talked, and Elias smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. I followed them through the city streets, keeping far enough back so they wouldn't notice me. They went to the Caldwell Refuge, the elegant restaurant where Elias had taken me for our anniversary 2 years ago, the same restaurant where he'd told me we couldn't afford to eat anymore because we needed to save. I watched through the window as they sat at a corner table, holding hands over the white tablecloth. The woman had to be Kendra Sterling, the interior designer Dorothea had mentioned. She was even more beautiful up close, with flawless makeup and jewelry that probably cost more than my car. She touched Elias's face gently, and he captured her hand and kissed her palm. I felt like someone was squeezing my chest with both hands. I stayed in my car for 2 hours, watching them eat and laugh and act like a couple deeply in love. When they finally left, Elias walked her to a silver BMW parked nearby. He kissed her goodbye, not a quick peck, but a real kiss that lasted long enough that I had to look away. That afternoon, Elias came home at his usual time with a story about a difficult client meeting. He complained about how tedious his day had been, how he wished he'd spent it with me instead. I nodded, smiled, and served him the dinner I'd somehow managed to cook while my world was collapsing. "How was your day, honey?" he asked, cutting his chicken as if nothing had happened. "Quiet," I said. I reorganized the closets and did some reading. "That's my good girl," he said, reaching over to pat my hand. "Always keeping busy." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl my plate against the wall and demand to know who Kendra was and how long this had been going on. But instead, I squeezed his hand back and asked if he wanted dessert. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert at following them. I learned their routine: lunches on Tuesdays and Thursdays, afternoon meetings that were actually dinners on Fridays, weekend trips Elias claimed were business conferences. They went to art galleries, wine tastings, and expensive boutiques where Kendra tried on clothes that cost more than I spent in 3 months. Elias bought her jewelry, flowers, and designer handbags. He paid for everything with credit cards I'd never seen. The worst part was seeing how happy he looked with her. He laughed more in one afternoon with Kendra than he had with me in the past year. He opened doors for her, pulled out her chair, and looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world, all the things he used to do for me when our marriage was real. One Saturday, I followed them to an equestrian club in upstate New York where Dorothea was a member. I parked outside and watched through the fence as they played tennis together. Dorothea was there too, sitting at a table on the patio, applauding when Kendra made a good shot. After the game, the 3 of them sat together having drinks. Dorothea was animated in a way I'd never seen her, laughing and gesturing as she talked with Kendra. She touched Kendra's arm affectionately and nodded approvingly at everything she said. It was painfully clear that Dorothea didn't just know about the affair, she was actively encouraging it. I drove home and sat in my empty house, finally understanding the complete truth. This wasn't just about Elias having an affair. It was about replacing me entirely. Dorothea had found someone she considered worthy of her son, and they were all working together to push me out. That night, Elias came home with scratches on his arms from the tennis game. When I asked about them, he said he'd been moving boxes at work and snagged his arm on a nail. Another lie delivered with such ease that I wondered how many others I'd believed over the years. "Elias," I said carefully, "your mother mentioned that interior designer again at dinner last week, Kendra Sterling. Have you thought about hiring her?" His face didn't change, but I noticed a tiny pause before he answered. "Oh, yes. I looked into her services, but she's very expensive. Maybe next year when business improves. She must be extremely talented to charge that much. I suppose so. I haven't actually met her personally. Lie after lie after lie. I nodded, smiled, and pretended to believe him. But inside I was taking notes. Every fabricated story, every invented excuse, every time he looked me in the eye and lied about where he'd been and who he was with. 2 months into my investigation, I realized something that changed everything. Elias wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to leave me for Kendra, but he wanted to ensure I got nothing in the divorce. All those conversations about money, all the restrictions on my spending, all the ways he'd made me financially dependent, it was all part of a calculated plan. He was going to divorce me and claim I'd contributed nothing to our marriage. He would keep the house, the cars, the investments, everything. I would be left with nothing while he started his new life with Kendra and his mother's blessing. But Elias had made one crucial mistake. He thought I was too weak and too foolish to fight back. He had no idea I was watching, learning, and formulating my own strategy. As I sat in our bedroom that night, listening to him sleep soundly beside me, I made a decision. If Elias wanted to play a game of money and deception, I would learn to play it better than he ever could. The next morning, I waited for Elias to leave for his client meeting, which I knew was actually lunch with Kendra. Then I did something I'd never done before. I walked into his home office and started going through his papers. Elias's study was his private sanctuary, the one room in the house I was never supposed to clean or organize. He kept it locked when he wasn't home, but I'd seen him hide the key under his desk lamp months ago. My hands were shaking as I turned the key and stepped inside. The office was neat and organized, with filing cabinets along one wall and a large desk covered in papers. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I began with the desk drawers, carefully going through folders and documents. Most of it was mundane business material I didn't understand: contracts for construction projects, letters from clients, invoices for materials. But in the bottom drawer, I found something intriguing: a folder labeled Personal Accounts that contained bank statements I'd never seen before. Elias had 3 different bank accounts I knew nothing about. The statements showed enormous amounts of money moving in and out, far more than I thought his business generated. There were deposits from companies I'd never heard of and cash withdrawals that seemed too large for normal expenses. I took photographs of everything with my phone, being careful to put every paper back exactly where I'd found it. My heart was pounding so frantically I felt faint, but I kept going. If Elias was hiding money from me, I needed to know how much and where it was. In the filing cabinet, I found more surprises. There were documents for a corporation called Caldwell Holdings LLC, which Elias had never mentioned. According to the papers, this company owns several properties around the city, properties Elias had told me belonged to his clients. One folder contained receipts for expensive purchases I didn't recognize: a watch that cost $15,000, a vacation to the Maldives we never took, jewelry from stores I'd never visited. All of these items were paid for with money from accounts I didn't know existed. But the most shocking discovery was in a folder marked Legal Documents. Inside were papers from an attorney I'd never heard of, discussing something called asset protection strategies. The documents talked about transferring money to offshore accounts and creating shell companies to hide wealth from potential creditors or legal claims. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I understood enough to know that Elias was deliberately hiding money. He was preparing for something, and I had the terrible feeling that something was our divorce. I spent 3 hours in that office, photographing every document that looked important. By the time I heard Elias's car pull into the driveway, I had everything locked back up and was in the kitchen preparing lunch as if nothing had happened. "How was your meeting?" I asked as he kissed my cheek. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "The Victoria project is moving faster than expected." Another lie. I'd seen his planner. There was no Victoria project. But I smiled, nodded, and asked if he wanted a sandwich. That afternoon, I did another thing I'd never done before. I called my old friend Chloe Hayes, who worked as an accountant downtown. We'd lost touch after I quit my job, but I hoped she would still help me. "Serena," Chloe said when she answered the phone. "Long time no talk. How are you?" "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Chloe, I need some advice about some financial documents. Could we meet for coffee?" "Sure. Is everything okay? You sound worried." "I'll explain when I see you." We met at a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Elias might go. Chloe looked the same as ever, with her curly red hair and kind smile. But when I showed her the photos on my phone, her expression turned serious. "Serena, where did you get these documents?" she asked, scrolling through the images. "They're my husband's business papers. I found them in his office." Chloe was silent for a long time, studying each image carefully. Finally, she looked up at me, concern evident in her eyes. "Serena, some of these transactions look very suspicious. This shell company, the offshore accounts, the cash withdrawals, this looks like money laundering." "Money laundering?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means taking money from illegal activities and making it appear legitimate by running it through different accounts and companies. It's a very serious crime." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" "I'm not a criminal investigator, but I've seen enough financial fraud cases to recognize the patterns." "Look at this," she said, pointing to one of the bank statements. "Your husband is receiving large cash deposits from companies that don't appear to exist. Then he's moving that money through several different accounts before it ends up in banks in tax havens. That's classic money laundering behavior." I felt the room spinning. What should I do? "You need to speak with someone who specializes in white-collar crime. I know a detective who works these kinds of cases, Detective Majors. He's very good at his job. Do you want me to give you his number?" I nodded, unable to speak. Chloe scribbled the detective's information on a napkin and handed it to me. "Serena, please be extremely careful," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "If your husband is involved in money laundering, it could be dangerous. Don't let him know you've figured anything out." I drove home in a daze, the detective's phone number burning a hole in my pocket. Elias was in his office when I got back, probably moving more illegal money while I made dinner. I cooked, I cleaned, and I acted normal. But inside, I was terrified. That night, as Elias slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I'd learned. My husband wasn't just cheating on me and planning to leave me with nothing. He was a criminal who'd been using our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. But for the first time in months, I felt something other than fear and sadness. I felt rage. Elias had lied to me about everything. He'd stolen years from me, and he was planning to destroy my life. But now I had information that could destroy his. Tomorrow I would call Detective Majors. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. The next morning, I waited for Elias to leave for work before dialing Detective Majors's number. My hands were shaking so badly I had to try 3 times before I got all the digits right. "Detective Majors, White Collar Crimes Unit," a deep voice answered. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My name is Serena Caldwell. Chloe Hayes gave me your number. I think my husband might be doing something illegal with money." There was a pause. "Mrs. Caldwell, can you come down to the precinct this afternoon? I'd like to discuss this in person." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small office at the police precinct across from a man in his 40s with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. Detective Majors had the photos from my phone spread out on his desk, studying them with a serious expression. "Mrs. Caldwell, how long has your husband been involved in these financial activities?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. I just found these papers yesterday. I had no idea any of this existed. Detective Majors nodded. It's common in these cases. Spouses are often unaware of their partner's illegal activities. He pointed to one of the bank statements. These transactions show a clear pattern of money laundering. Your husband is receiving large amounts of cash from dubious sources and running it through multiple accounts to conceal its origin. What kind of dubious sources? I asked. Based on these amounts and patterns, likely drug trafficking money, illegal gambling, or other organized crime activities. Your husband's real estate development business provides the perfect front to launder dirty money through buying and selling properties. How much prison time could he face for this? I asked. Money laundering is a serious felony. Depending on the amounts involved, he could be looking at anywhere from 10 to 20 years in federal prison, plus massive fines and forfeiture of all assets purchased with illegal money. All assets. I repeated. Everything, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, the investments. If they were purchased with laundered funds, the government will seize them. My mind raced. If Elias went to jail and lost everything, what would happen to me? I would be left with nothing, just as he'd planned, except now it would be because he was a criminal, not because he'd outsmarted me in divorce court. Detective Majors, I said slowly, what if I helped you build a case against him? What if I could get more evidence? He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Mrs. Caldwell, that would be very dangerous. If your husband suspected you were investigating him, he could become violent. These kinds of people don't take kindly to betrayal. But I'm already in danger, aren't I? If he's involved with criminals, if he's planning to divorce me and leave me penniless, I'm not safe anyway. Detective Majors was silent for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I have access to his office, his computer, his files. I could copy more documents, record conversations, maybe even find out who he's working with. But I would need protection, and I would need assurances about what happens to me when this is all over. What kind of assurances? I want immunity from any charges related to his crimes. I want protection if he tries to hurt me. And I want to keep some of the assets that were purchased with legitimate money from his real estate business. Detective Majors smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Mrs. Caldwell, you're thinking like a prosecutor. Let me make some calls and see what we can arrange. 3 days later, I met with Detective Majors and an assistant district attorney named Ada Solarek. They'd prepared an official cooperation agreement that gave me everything I'd asked for in exchange for my help in building a case against Elias. Mrs. Caldwell, Ada Solarek explained, you'll be working as a confidential informant. We'll provide you with recording devices and train you on how to gather evidence safely. But you must understand the risks. If your husband discovers what you're doing, you could be in severe physical danger. I understand, I said, signing the papers with a steady hand. When do we start? For the next 2 months, I became a different person. By day, I played the role of the obedient wife, cooking, cleaning, and asking Elias about his day. But every moment he was out of the house, I was working. I installed tiny recording devices in his office and his car. I copied files from his computer onto thumb drives. I photographed every document I could find, building a complete picture of his illegal activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Elias was laundering money for a major drug trafficking organization led by a man named Braxton the Bear Riggs. He would accept cash payments of $50,000 to $100,000, then use his real estate company to purchase properties with that money. Later, he would sell the properties and deposit the profits into legitimate bank accounts, making the drug money appear clean. But Elias had gotten greedy. Instead of just taking his percentage for laundering the money, he'd been skimming extra cash for himself. He'd used the stolen money to fund his affair with Kendra, buying her expensive gifts and taking her on lavish trips. I recorded conversations where Elias boasted to his partner about how easy it was to fool the authorities. I photographed meetings where he accepted briefcases full of cash from dangerous-looking men. I documented every transaction, every lie, every crime. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. When Elias came home each night, he would kiss me and tell me about his day, fabricating stories about legitimate business while I knew he'd spent the afternoon with drug lords and criminals. "You seem different lately," he said one night over dinner. "More confident. I like it." "I've been reading more," I said, which was true. I'd been reading everything I could find about money laundering and financial crime, educating myself. "That's wonderful, honey. Knowledge is power." If only he knew how much knowledge I'd acquired and how I planned to use that power against him. At the end of 2 months, Detective Majors told me we had enough evidence to arrest Elias and seize all his assets. But I asked for 1 more week. I wanted to be in that divorce courtroom when Elias thought he'd won everything. I wanted to see his face when he realized his perfect plan had been destroyed by the wife he'd thought was too stupid to fight back. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Elias to walk into it. The divorce proceedings began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom wearing a simple black dress that made me look smaller and more helpless than I felt. Elias arrived with his team of expensive lawyers, all carrying thick briefcases and wearing confident smiles. "Good morning, Serena," Elias said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I hope we can get through this quickly and amicably." I nodded docilely, playing my part to perfection. "I just want what's fair, Elias." He patted my shoulder like I was a child. "Of course you do, honey. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of." Kendra arrived a few minutes later, wearing a stunning blue suit that probably cost more than I used to earn in a month. She sat in the gallery behind Elias, her presence a clear message about who would be taking my place. Dorothea sat beside her, both of them whispering and smiling like old friends planning a celebration. When we entered the courtroom, Elias's lead lawyer, Mr. Villalobos, immediately took control. He was a tall, gray-haired man with an expensive watch, the kind of attorney who charges $1,000 an hour and wins cases through intimidation. "Your Honor," Mr. Villalobos began, "this is a straightforward case. My client, Mr. Elias Caldwell, is a successful businessman who has supported his wife for 8 years. Mrs. Caldwell has no work experience, no education beyond high school, and has made 0 financial contribution to the marriage. She's requesting an unreasonable settlement that would devastate my client's business and livelihood." Judge Wallace listened without expression as Mr. Villalobos laid out his case. They had charts showing Elias's income, diagrams demonstrating my lack of contribution, and testimony from witnesses who painted me as a gold digger who trapped an innocent man. Dorothea took the witness stand first, wearing a navy suit and pearls that